Hello, my name is JGideon, and this is my week 3 interactive journal. So, for the first question I chose was, how has the experience of working with a diverse range of students impacted your understanding of equitable education practice? I have worked in almost every age range and ability level, and every new population has taught me more about what equity should look like. I think a lot of teachers can attest to hearing, that's not fair. How come Bobby gets to do X when I have to do Y? Because students want equality rather than equity. Equality is easy to understand. So let's imagine two siblings are playing in the park. The slide is closed. Monkey bars are available. And this applies to both siblings. It is equally unfair that they can't go on the slide. However, the older sibling is able to do the monkey bars without her dad picking her up. And the younger sibling comes to the bars, but needs her dad to lift her to the bars to get across without falling. This is equity to access the monkey bars. The older child does not need the same support as the younger child, but at the end, they both complete the activity to the best of their ability. The older sister getting annoyed that the younger sister got help mirrors students in schools who complain that Bobby gets to do his math work in the resource room when I have to stay here to do it in the regular classroom, without understanding that Bobby needs the additional support and reduced distractions to succeed. There are many ways that this might be present in schools by teaching and not only, I'm sorry, there are many ways that this may be present in schools, um, but it not only applies to our underperforming students. Differentiation strategies and UDL guidelines require teachers to provide equitable education experiences for all learners. So we often talk about the students who are underperforming, but then the students that are naturally high performing, for example, may cruise through school with zero additional support in place. But there may have been a need for organizational support or social emotional learning and regulation. We can address all students and ensure that everybody has a meaningfully productive education that allows them to perform to their highest level when we are following equitable practices. Finally, identifying individual needs and diversifying instruction for each student is absolutely necessary for my TK and kindergarten ESN students. Their disabilities require individualized instruction to foster success. I may mess up this name, I apologize. Al Saidalani and Rakhap in 2026 identified that when well supported, the transition for children with disabilities fosters inclusive communication, personalized services, and collaborative partnerships that enhance both learning and developmental outcomes. So at the start of the year, I grouped my students by performance level or ability, and then I made general adjustments to materials and instruction for each group. By the end of the year and further coursework surrounding equitable instruction, I better understand the need for each student to have their independent prompt levels, measures of success, and learning methods. So just by grouping them by ability and giving that group blanket supports, so all of the students in that group got the same learning supports, I realize now that that was erroneous, and I should be doing it in more individualized and tailored ways, which was the intent at the start of my school year last year. I am trying to give myself grace that it was my first year teaching and I was very overwhelmed. And so I really do intend for this next upcoming year to tailor my instruction even more to each one of my students in my classroom, not just the ones or not just by ability level. It will require more work, but I am truly prepared to dive into this upcoming school year with equitable educational practices as a priority. All right, my second question is, can you reflect on a specific interaction with a parent or community member that challenged your communication skills as a teacher? There were a couple. I decided to talk obviously about just one, but I have a student who was in my classroom last year and will be in my classroom again this year, who exhibits a lot of concerning behaviors. He engages in self injurious behaviors, he eats non edible items, he will hit and grab peers, and he has a lot of sensory dysregulation. Given these challenges, his mom has every right to be concerned and highly involved in his education. That said, there were times where I had to put boundaries in place, dismiss her from my classroom, engage in lengthy conversations, and hold multiple IEP addenda throughout the year. One of the challenges that I faced in communicating with her was ensuring that she understood the reality of the request that she was making. For example, she would ask for an assessment and expect or hope for results and adjustments to the IEP by the end of the week. So there was a lot of education surrounding the IEP process and assessments and how we could get different support in place for him throughout this school year. Additionally, and probably of more concern, was controlling the conversation that my paraprofessional was attempting to maintain with his mom. His parents sought a lot of outside opinion and advice and wanted to know what resources other parents were using or other professionals were suggesting. And that's fine. I really have no problem with her reaching out to other parents in the classroom to get their feedback on local agencies, etc. However, the paraprofessional would not uphold the boundary in place and would often hold conversations about diagnostics, medical decisions, advice about whether she should seek additional or second opinions, or she would talk about brain development when she was not educated in the field. That's an area that I even refuse to discuss due to my lack of education. So this did ultimately cost the paraprofessional her job. However, along the way, I had to mitigate this and address with the mom that she should rely on me rather than my support staff for this information and advice. For example, she had asked me about a certain assessment or something cognitive that might be going on with her child. I referred her to speak with my principal, who could get her in touch with the school psychologist. Later in the day, I overheard her talking about the same thing with the paraprofessional. And the paraprofessional told her to not seek a second opinion and waste her money. So, this was definitely the biggest issue that I had throughout my year and biggest struggle or challenge that I had with communication. It is something that I hope I won't have to handle this year because, like I said, we did let that paraprofessional go because of this issue. But I do think that it made me stronger and a stronger educator. And it's given me more confidence in managing my classroom and being in charge of how my paraprofessionals, sorry, how my paraprofessionals interact with my parents, which should be minimal. It also has taught me to proactively explain boundaries to parents at the beginning of the school year so that they understand that the paraprofessionals are not to be treated as a source of information, advice, or anything to do with their child's diagnosis. I also introduced a communication platform to my parents at the end of the school year last year that I will be using this year that I really hope will reduce the instances or the likelihood that something like this might happen again. And finally, reflect on a specific instance where you had to prioritize the emotional well being of a student in your role as a teacher. Um, as Weisling in 2023 summarized, no learning will happen if students are dysregulated, and my classroom is no exception. The article from Weisling explains that, quote, state dependent functioning, or how we feel determines how we function, and emotional contagion, the emotional state of two interacting people, has an effect on the other's emotional state, are two concepts that can dysregulate or balance our brains and bodies. Let me kind of go back and talk about those each. So, state dependent functioning is the fact that how we feel determines how we function. And realistically, I feel like that is enough of an explanation in and of itself. So I don't feel good. I'm not going to be giving my best effort. If I am anxious, I am not going to be performing very well. And so, and then additionally, emotional contagion is that the emotional state of two people that are interacting will go between each other. They will have an effect on the other's emotional state. So if my student is regulated but I'm dysregulated, he is not going to learn. If I'm regulated and he's dysregulated, he is not going to learn. We are going to feed off of each other, and we have to have regulation in order to promote learning. So, my students' dysregulation and crises are exacerbated by their inability to communicate their needs and what would help them feel better. When we are supporting a student in crisis who cannot communicate, the number one priority is to guide the student to a calm state. This could take a few minutes, it could take hours. Regardless, no demands should be placed. Adults are expected to remain level headed and see the child rather than the behavioral episode. So, there is one student that comes to mind who becomes dysregulated and struggles to communicate what he needs or what is bothering him. He has engaged in tantrums for upwards of an hour, and when I reported this to parents, they asked that I call home when this happens so that they can come and pick him up to bring him home. This was a no-brainer for me that this was not going to happen, and my principal suggested the same response. This became a communication issue with parents as well as explaining the importance of teaching him how to cope and process through his emotions rather than removing him from school and most likely coddling him with attention and TLC at home. I am a parent myself, and I completely relate to the desire to want to be their only safe space. And you want to be their base that they can come to and relax and let their guard down. But this was an instance where the student's well being and best interest did not align with what the parents wanted. And I had to handle that situation very delicately. After explaining to parents the long term impact of rewarding him with home every time he is emotionally dysregulated, they understood and we found a resolution of communicating when he has escalations, the topography of his behaviors, our responses, the staff's responses, and the hypothesized function. Hopefully, this strategy can be taken also into the ABA sessions that he has to create consistency and reinforce that overall message. So that was an instance where I had to prioritize the student's well-being over both, academic performance and like parent request, which I understand at the end of the day, it's their child, and if they were to argue the case and push back, we might have to accommodate that. But I am going to do everything I can to make sure that parents understand that the well being of their student or their child and maintaining and promoting that well being can sometimes feel very uncomfortable for the teacher or the adult. Thank you.